for the last one was 3C and D. And then after this one, we're going to get 3E and F. Now, the next letter in the alphabet, we'll look at what happens inside. If you had a C there, think of our transformations. Is that going to affect something horizontally or vertically? Horizontally. That's going to move things left and right. Okay? So all we have to think about, well, it's the opposite, right? If I have a minus pi over 6, that's going to move it right pi over 6. And then we can figure out what the graph is going to be. Because the key thing that we're going to talk about for a shortcut is that this is going to change our starting point. And by starting point, for a sine graph, I said it always starts on the sinusoidal axis going up. And a cos graph always starts at a maximum. Well, where that starting point now is going to change because we're moving it left and right. So for our graph, again, in this case, we're going to graph our parent graph first. So what does cos look like? Well, it has a period of 2 pi, so we're going to mark those values down. Has a maximum of 1 and a minimum of 1, because the amplitude is still 1 in this case. And we're going to draw it temporarily with a dotted line. That's our regular cos graph. Now, if we move that cos graph pi over 6 to the right, I'm going to take out a different color. Okay, pi over 2 is this, so pi over 6, which is 30 degrees. Remember, pi over 2 is 90 degrees. So I'm going to estimate about where 30 degrees is. And I'm going to move this point right there over pi over 6 to the right. I'm going to do the same thing with this point. I'm going to move it pi over 6 to the right. I'm going to take and I'm going to label this as pi over 6 so I have some sort of sense of scale. I'm going to take this point at the minimum and move it pi over 6 to the right. This point and move it pi over 6 to the right. And finally this point and move it pi over 6 to the right. And now I'm going to draw that same curve with my phase shift. Only thing I need to label is to show that I've moved the beginning part pi over 6 to the right. Everything else follows from my original labels that were there. That's all you need to do. Way better than taking those 5 points and actually trying to add pi over 6 to them. I mean, you could, right? This point before, right, is at 2 pi comma 1. And if you took 2 pi and added pi over 6, well, you'd need a common denominator. And you would get 13 pi over 6. So if you wanted to, we could label that as 13 pi over 6. And this point right here would be 13 pi over 6 comma 1. And you wouldn't have to label that. As long as you have shown this initial one labeled as pi over 6 as I did, and you've shown that you've moved it to the right, then everything else follows because of our original labels that we did with the blue graph. So 3E and F.